Time's a thief, he steals away many blossoms of today. Joy he steals and also tears, pilfers hope and filches fears. May the rascal steal from you only what you want him to.
My name's Joel, and I make video games for a living. If you're wondering why we started today's episode with a poem about time, it's because you're going to have to get used to wasting time if you want to get through Final Fantasy 16. Was that too harsh? It's not that bad, I promise. Normally, I like to have a very specific topic for these videos, but Final Fantasy 16 gets so many things right and wrong at the same time that I wanted to handle a broader topic on this episode. So today, we're talking about spectacle versus substance. We'll go over larger-than-life action sequences and difficulty systems, pushing players to interact with mechanics, and the systems I would have pushed to change if I were a part of the team. Hopefully you're interested in a grab bag of ideas, because this episode is going to be a little sporadic. We're going to look at 3 key elements of Final Fantasy 16 and examine how they blend spectacle and substance. I've spoken a few times about the importance of an opening hook, and Final Fantasy usually does pretty good on these. In Final Fantasy 7, we started with the bombing mission. In 9, it's the abduction of the princess. In 10, we have Sin destroying Xanarkand during a professional blitzball game. In Final Fantasy 16, the first thing you do is reenact Gandalf's fight with the Balrog. Only a few minutes after that, you're placed in the middle of an Attack on Titan episode where the soldiers have no idea how to fight because the battle is a clusterfuck. I just looked at the fights going, "Get them in! Back into line!" Final Fantasy 16 brings the action into your hands with QuickTime events to help sell battles that were previously only possible in movies like Advent Children. There's no shortage of spectacle in the story either. Every major plot point builds to a massive boss battle between icons until the game is ready for you to let them fight. The next thing Final Fantasy 16 does well is the combat. Every boss has clearly marked attacks, and it makes for a generally fun time when you get into the zone, dodging, parrying, and countering the boss. Everything the enemies do is telegraphed, which is important in a game that's as visually busy as Final Fantasy 16. Every special attack has massive particle effects, and you'll spend half the battle going, "Shapes and colors the likes of which I've never seen." Then, the combat has great skill expression tools for players. You swing your sword with the square button and cast magic with triangle. Normally, you have to choose one or the other, but if you press triangle at the exact moment your sword hits a target, you'll use a magic attack without interrupting your sword combo. This is called a magic burst, and you can do up to 4 magic bursts in a single sword combo. It's decently hard to do and adds a little substance to the combat beyond just button mashing. The last system I want to touch on is the accessibility items. Instead of offering players a choice of difficulty settings, Final Fantasy 16 gives you items that will let you do things like the above combos by simply mashing the attack button. Or you can equip an item that will automatically dodge attacks for you if you're not stuck in an animation already. And this take on difficulty settings certainly has more depth than the damage sponges of past Final Fantasy games. Some of those bosses took literal hours to beat. So we started with cool cinematics, the core of a decent combat system, and a really interesting take on difficulty settings. We should have everything a game could want for both spectacle and substance. So how does Final Fantasy 16 fail at the execution of all 3 of these? Let's start with the story. What typically makes for the best Final Fantasy stories is a clear theme, and every character from your party is an exploration of the theme. In Final Fantasy VII, the story is about environmentalism. Cloud begins as someone indifferent to the plight. Barrett is a fanatic. Yuffie is from a poor nation that needs materia to keep up to Midgar. Red 13 wants to live in harmony with the Earth. Cid wants to expand humanity to the stars. In Final Fantasy IX, we explore what makes a person. Garnet is a princess, exploring if her birth defines her. Freya is a warrior whose lover has forgotten her, exploring if memory or legacy defines her. Vivi is a clone. Amarant has no friends. Aiko was abandoned as a child. Steiner defines himself through his work. In Final Fantasy X, we explore religion. Tidus comes from another world without the religion. Yuna is a priestess. Auron has literally seen what's on the other side and knows the truth. Wakka is a stout believer. Riku is anti-religion. Final Fantasy 16 fails in the story department because there's no drama in the group. You don't have a party that works together and all have different perspectives. You only ever play as Clive, and the followers you get throughout the game all have the same perspective as you. Slavery is bad, which, like, no shit. And like I alluded to, it doesn't even explore this theme well. Side quests don't have ramifications to the world. They're just making you walk around and pointing out how messed up and dark this world is. The best side quest in Final Fantasy XVI pales in comparison to the weakest side quests of The Witcher 3. What's worse is that the game takes 35 hours to beat according to Google. And on YouTube, we can see that it takes over 20 hours to watch all the cutscenes. So beating Final Fantasy XVI involves more time sitting and watching the game than it does actually playing. The boss I'm showing in the background took me less time to beat than the 3-minute long cinematic the game plays to kill the last quarter of the boss's health. During this whole sequence, I pushed 6 buttons. Speaking of combat, the game's clever systems never need to be used because the game's so painfully easy. There's no classes or interesting customizations to really define your playstyle. Each skill has 2 upgrades and one of them just lets you equip it to any icon stance. So while you could use logic to cast your abilities, there's no point in Final Fantasy XVI. The game just wants you to follow the ABCs of combat.
Always be casting!
Don't get me wrong, the gameplay here can be fun. Swapping stances to use all of your different skills, timing some of the abilities to counter enemies, and weaving in magic attacks into your combos is great. But the reward for optimal play isn't worth the effort it takes. There's not nearly enough depth in the combat system, and all the spectacle in the world can't remedy that. After you've seen a takedown animation 100 times, you're just left going, "Oh my god, I don't care!" The accessibility gear also ruins part of the RPG elements. For some reason, your gear is where the designers decided to put the most meaningful upgrades. There are accessories that grant you bonus damage after dodging, or lower the cooldown of your icon abilities. These should have been part of the skill tree. Those are what let players define their fighting style. But now, if you equip the items to make the game easier, you're losing out on the fun of customizing your character's playstyle. So, our difficulty system is actually hurting the depth and substance of our game. So, how would I fix these 3 elements in Final Fantasy XVI? Well, I'd start by doing this. Obviously, that's a joke, but the things Final Fantasy XVI does make it feel like it has no business being part of the main series to me. This could have easily been a spin-off game. To fix the game, I think we have to increase the substance of the game's systems. We have plenty of spectacle. In fact, we could lose some. 3-minute long cutscenes to defeat an enemy is ridiculous. And some of the story needs to go as well. 20+ hours of cutscenes in a 35-hour game is too much. At least Final Fantasy XV had the decency to use a prequel movie instead of acting like a bad DM, throwing their world building onto us before we're even remotely invested. The game just forces so much exposition down your throat, especially in these cutscenes.
To set his sights on the crystalline dominion, an altogether easier target, possessed of no less ether.
To fix our story, I'd give you a party of characters and try to explore a theme. In the early game, there's actually hints of what could have been a really interesting story. We have Clive talking about how it's his duty to protect his younger brother, who's sick but blessed by the Phoenix and destined to rule, despite how, in traditional monarchies, the eldest son becomes the heir. We have Jill, who fights to stop others from being tortured. Sid uses his power to try and shape a better world, and members of the Legion of Steel say things like, "Our kind don't question orders, we obey." Imagine a story where these characters were your party and we actually explored the themes of duty and responsibility, instead of the story we have now where it's just a bunch of characters getting together and having a pointless,
"You guys could settle it with a talking like this contest."
A story where Joshua's health came into question on if he could actually lead. Should Clive overthrow his brother? Sid wants to build a better world, but who is he sacrificing for it? Jill is saving lives, but helps the slavers, so is it better to let some people die? Dig into the banality of evil with the followers of the Steel Legion. You could do so much more with this world than what we got. Now, for the combat. A recent trend among designers is to avoid having difficulty settings, which is generally a good idea. Difficulty settings ask players to commit to their experience before they know anything about the game. Putting a game on an easier setting can be demoralizing. I know I've definitely hurt my gaming experience in the past because I've insisted on playing on the hardest difficulty, and when I turned it down, it felt like admitting defeat.
You gonna cry? You gonna cry? Huh? Huh? You gonna cry? You gonna cry? Huh?
What are you?
Huh? You're gonna squirt some? You're gonna cry? Huh? Yeah, see, you're gonna cry, huh?
But as cool as Final Fantasy XVI's accessibility items are, they aren't the best way to handle difficulty. Their inclusion limits players' customization. From Software has mastered difficulty settings in the Dark Souls games. They make most bosses melee. If you play a mage, you can naturally play outside of the boss's effective range, or for normal enemies, you can kite them and abuse their pathfinding, or the max range they're willing to chase you. From Software achieves multiple difficulty settings in their game by giving players options on their playstyles that will have different experiences for the player. So if I could have worked on Final Fantasy XVI, I would have pushed the accessibility items into the skill tree, ideally increasing the depth of the combat without losing the cool ideas the designers had. I'd give players upgrades to reward optimal play, like giving abilities bonus damage when they follow up a magic burst combo, with the bonus damage increasing to match the player's combo size. Or give players upgrades that massively increase the stagger bar after parrying their opponent. Then, to remove the accessibility items, I'd give players upgrades that slow down time after they cast certain spells, or give players upgrades that heal them based on the damage their skills do. The idea behind these kinds of upgrades are that skilled players are now properly rewarded for doing the difficult combat tasks, like parries and magic burst combos, while novice players who get hit more frequently can have upgrades to make them more durable. We're helping players set the difficulty of the game based on their skill. In a way that doesn't feel condescending or limit access to equipment slots, we're increasing the substance of our combat system. If I had to judge Final Fantasy XVI as an action game, its combat system is too shallow. If I judge it as an RPG, there's no meaningful customization to my character's playstyle, and the side quests are boring with pointless rewards. If I judge it as a Final Fantasy game, there's no drama within a group of characters, which is the core of the series. The story feels like it's a first draft.
Official first draft. Of course, there's a lot of cheating in there. A lot of they fight.
And it's exactly because Final Fantasy XVI succeeds and fails at so many different things that I felt compelled to make a weird episode where I addressed them all instead of having a singular solid thesis. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments. Maybe I'll do more generic episodes. Whatever the game is, it isn't Final Fantasy. Not to me, at least. It's the equivalent of a Transformers movie. You're coming here for the spectacle, for the giant fights between icons and the flashing lights. And thankfully, the designers at least did that well. They also tried to make the story grander since they saw how much Aerith's death affected us all, and they went,
"Wait till you see this next one. Everybody dies."
The problem is, the game lacks substance, so everything just falls flat. If I had to rank this among the other mainline Final Fantasy games, this one's certainly closer to actually being 16 than number 1.